والنور الله لا يعطى العاص لا يعطى العاص
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد, dear respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We are discussing Usul al-Fiqh in this series, and in the last episode we spoke about the definition of Usul al-Fiqh. Now, if you remember, we said that Usul al-Fiqh is the set of rules by which we can deduce the Shar'i ruling, or by which we can come up with the Shar'i ruling. Usul al-Fiqh in general are the set of tools and principles that enable us to understand the text, the divine text. So Usul al-Fiqh is a set of tools that enables us to understand the divine text. The text is just a text. It needs to be understood. How do we understand that text? It is not just using our minds without a set of guidelines and without set of tools. Even when we use our aql, once we use our mind and our intellect, it should be used in a particular way. And in fact, when we use our minds to understand anything, we don't just use our minds like this. Internally, in the subconscious, there are a set of tools and guidelines that we use them internally to understand something, to understand anything in our life. So when we want to understand that text, we need to use our minds to understand the text. How can we understand the text using our minds? We need to have a set of tools and guidelines in order to be able to approach the text and understand the text correctly. And this is the main benefit of Usul al-Fiqh. Okay? However, I was talking about the definition of Usul al-Fiqh, and this definition of Usul al-Fiqh guides us directly to its main purpose, which is the ability to understand the text. We will also say that the other main purpose of Usul al-Fiqh is the ability. It enables the mujtahid, the faqih in fact even, to be able to extract rulings from the textual evidences or from the divine text. However, before further explanation about the benefits of Usul al-Fiqh, we need to explain or clarify the contents of Usul al-Fiqh. What do we expect to see in any book of Usul al-Fiqh? What do we expect to study in any text or in any discourse talking about Usul al-Fiqh? This is quite important, brothers and sisters. Why? Because, you know, when we, some scholars like Mahmoud Shakir said that when you want to study a book, you need to start with two things: the introduction of that book and the table of contents. The table of contents gives you a snapshot, a quick idea about what you are going to study. If you remember the discussion that we mentioned last episode, or in one of the previous episodes, about zooming in and zooming out, and we said that it is good to zoom out to have an overall idea or picture about the subject that you are discussing. So looking at the table of contents will give you this ability to zoom out and to look at the contents, all of them at once. And this will give you a better understanding of what you expect to see in Usul al-Fiqh. And believe me, brothers and sisters, it will help you to shorten the time you need to spend in studying this subject. Also, if you remember, my dear respected brothers and sisters, that we said that the introductory elements to any ilm or any discipline include the definition, include the subject matter, includes the benefits as well. It includes the masail. Yes, the masail, the issues that you are going to study. Not in details, but in a very general way, in a very abstracted way. So what are those masail that we are going to study in Usul al-Fiqh? We spoke about the definition. We need to speak about the masail in a very general format. The masail of Usul al-Fiqh are as the following. First of all, the adillah, the sources of Sharia. What are the sources of Sharia? This is the first thing. The second thing is the output of Usul al-Fiqh. What is the output of Usul al-Fiqh? We said we have sources of Sharia. Okay, what are those sources of Sharia? And then what do we need to reach to? What do we need to conclude? We need to come up with the rulings, because we said that Usul al-Fiqh is a set of rules, a set of guidelines, a set of tools that enable us to extract rulings from the sources. So we need to understand those rulings. What are we talking about? Yeah, again, generally speaking, not in details. So the first subject that we will see in Usul al-Fiqh is the sources of Sharia, the adillah of Sharia. The second main subject is the rulings that we need to come up with, the rulings that we need to extract. Again, in a very general way, such as what? Such as the wujub, the obligation, such as the prohibition, such as the permissibility. These are called al-ahkam al-taklifiyya. Yes? And how those ahkam can be built. So this is another subject that we can come up with, or we should come up with when we study Usul al-Fiqh. And this is a subject that we see covered in any book of Usul al-Fiqh. The third main subject that we see in any book that talks about Usul al-Fiqh is set of tools that can be employed on the text, on the divine text, or on the adillah, or on the sources of Sharia, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', in order to help us to derive those rulings. So I always present it as follows, that we have three main circles. Each circle is like a step. The first circle includes the sources of Sharia, mainly Quran and Sunnah, which is the divine text. The third circle on the other side is the outcome, which is the rulings like obligation, prohibition, and permissibility, and some other rulings. Okay, this is the third circle. Example of the third circle is to say that if a divine text, please listen to this example. If the divine text says وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, establish the salah, we can understand using certain rulings that this text means salah is obligatory. What does obligation mean? Obligation is one of the outcomes of Usul al-Fiqh. So salah is obligatory. How did we come up with that? We will explain it in a minute. But this third circle includes general rulings such as what we have said, which is what? The obligation of certain practices. Obligation. So we need to talk about obligation. So in any book of Usul al-Fiqh, you will see a circle discussing obligation or prohibition or maybe permissibility. Now, in the middle, what is the link between the divine text And the other circle, the third circle, how do we come up with the obligation or prohibition from the divine text? How do we extract those rulings from the divine text? We need a set of rulings and guidelines. Those guidelines, build the inner circle, which is the main part of Usul al-Fiqh, the inner circle. This inner circle is a collection of rules, guidelines, principles that are mainly applied or should be applied on the divine text, on the text, to enable us to understand the text, to interpret the text properly in order to come up with those rulings. So for example, when we said that in the divine text, we find that Allah says, establish the salah, wa aqimus salah. Yes? And the ruling that we know is salah is obligatory, prayer is obligatory. How did we come up with that ruling that salah is obligatory? We said that this text says wa aqimu, establish. Establish is a command. And command from Usul al-Fiqh perspective means obligation. Commands in general lead to obligation. A commandment from Allah Jalla wa Ala means that Allah obliges us to do something. So when Allah says wa aqimus salah and establish the salah, Allah is commanding us to establish prayer. And hence prayer is obligatory. How? Because this form of language, wa aqimus salah, is a command, and there is a rule that says any command in any linguistic command leads to the obligation of what it has been commanded to do so. So the three main circles that we are expecting to see in Usul al-Fiqh, the sources of Sharia, one circle, the outcome, which is the obligations, the ahkam, and we will discuss them in details, and in between a set of guidelines that enable us to understand the divine text. Now there is a third or a fourth circle that has been added in Usul al-Fiqh or to Usul al-Fiqh in order to complement the discussion, to complete the discussion and to complement it, which is the discussion related to those individuals who can employ those guidelines and rules on the divine text in order to come up with the obligations. In order to come up with the rulings. Who are those people? What are their qualifications? Yes, and so on. Related to this circle or this discussion is the discussion that is concerned about those who are not qualified to do so. Okay? Those who are not qualified to do so, what are they going to do? Are they going to extract those rulings by themselves, but they are not qualified to do so? If they are not qualified to do so, then what shall they do? They should ask those who are qualified to do so. Okay, if they ask them regarding any certain rulings, how should they ask them? What is the etiquette? And what can they do if they ask more than one scholar or one qualified person who can extract rulings and so on? So these etiquettes and guidelines are studied in this circle. And in brief, we are expecting to see four main topics discussed in any book of Usul al-Fiqh. Sources of Sharia, the outcome of Usul al-Fiqh, which is the set of rules that Allah wants us to do or Allah does not want us to do, which is the obligation, prohibition and permissibility, as well as some other rules. And in between, a set of guidelines that enable us to understand those sources to come up with those rules. And the fourth topic is the qualifications of those who can employ those rulings to, the qualifications of those who are qualified to employ those tools and guidelines that enable them to understand those divine texts or those sources to come up with those rulings, as well as the situation of those who are not qualified, what shall they do? So these are the 4 main topics of Usul al-Fiqh. I hope that this is clear, and this clarifies the contents of any book. This gives us a snapshot or a zoomed out picture of the whole structure or architecture of Usul al-Fiqh. It also provides us with one important introductory element regarding Usul al-Fiqh, which is the Masail of Usul al-Fiqh. In the coming episode, inshallah, we will speak more about the benefits of Usul al-Fiqh. Inshallah, Jazakumullahu khairan. This will be enough, inshallah, for this point. Jazakallah.